It's a pleasure to have you all as part of our Oregon Cybersecurity Summit. It's my pleasure to welcome Kevin Mandia as our next speaker. Kevin has served as the CEO of FireEye since June of 2016 and a member of its board of directors since February of 16. Kevin joined FireEye as Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer in December of 2013 when the company that he founded in 2004, Mandia, was acquired by FireEye. Under Kevin's leadership, Mandia grew to more than $100 million in revenue. Kevin has spent 2 decades in information security, beginning his career serving in the U.S. Air Force before moving on into the private sector. His experience gained serving on the front lines of major cybersecurity incidents has made him a leading cybersecurity expert, and he is often requested by corporate directors, executives, government officials, and those who are facing serious cybersecurity challenges. He's co-authored 2 books on responding to security breaches and has taught advanced graduate work at both George Washington University and at Carnegie Mellon. Kevin holds a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from Lafayette College and a Master of Science degree in Forensic Science from George Washington University. We're incredibly fortunate to have him here with us today. Kevin, thank you very much for being with us, and a virtual welcome to the University of Oregon.
Thank you, Jesse. Really appreciate it. And for those of you joining, I'm going to throw some slides up, mostly because it's a lot easier to look at pictures than look at me. But for the next hour, really about 40 minutes of it, I'll be presenting. And thank you for that background on me, Jesse, and I really appreciate it. What I'm going to do today that's germane to the presentation really is based on us responding to about 1,000 breaches every year. And as we're having this dialogue, the folks at my organization are responding to well over 150 security breaches. And for each one of these, it sounds really tactical. Oh my gosh, all they do is respond to breaches. But every time you respond to a security breach, usually by the time we're hired to do it, the breach is at a scale and scope where the folks need help. And so we're responding to a lot of nation state-based attacks and other things. But in addition to the context of responding to breaches contributing to my dialogue today, we also have over 240 threat analysts that speak 34 languages located in well over 20 countries doing active research so that every time we respond to a breach, we kind of codify the forensics of each one, and then we feed it over to our threat analysts saying who did it, why did they do it, where are they? Pierce anonymity on this, kind of help us figure that out, because who hacks into these networks does matter. And if you can shine a light on the threat actors, you can start imposing risk and consequence to their actions. And then we do over 600 red teams every year. So the bottom line is, those are the activities that lead me to here, where I'll talk about the threats as we see them on the front lines. Then I'll talk about the boardroom and the questions they're asking me, because I have the privilege of speaking to 1 to 2 boards every week. Then I want to talk about the Chief Information Security Officer, how we've seen that role change, and it's never been more important. Then I'm just going to end with some thoughts about the future. And then Jesse, I will finish in about 35 minutes, and then hopefully we get a ton of questions. You can ask me anything, doesn't mean I know the answers. But starting off with the threats, and as basically I've got 3 different categories. And we're going to start with implants. And when I say an implant, that is rogue or malicious software embedded in trusted software. That's simple. And the most famous implant used by threat actors was the SolarWinds implant discovered last December of 2020. So I'll give you the background on that. And many of you may be thinking, my organization will never have to worry about an implant. But as you see in the lessons learned, implants are fair game for cyber espionage. If you are in pharmaceuticals, healthcare, defense industrial base, and maybe even education, implants are fair game to try to access your networks. So with the SolarWinds implant, what happened here, I have a little Russian flag for those of you that don't recognize the flag there. And if you're Russian, no offense, I'm not anti-Russia, just so happens they were the ones behind this implant. Somebody broke into SolarWinds in 2019, and SolarWinds is a company that has over 300,000 customers, and they make software that do network management to manage devices. And we are, at my company, a SolarWinds customer. Somebody broke into SolarWinds, and in the last stage of making production code, that intruder injected an implant into the platform. And we went public about that on December 8th. We actually went public at my company, FireEye, that we had been breached. And we didn't know how at the time, but we recognized, based on some of the forensic evidence that we saw, that we're probably up against the Russian SVR. It's amazing. Every spy agency seems to be 3 letters. So when you hear SVR, think CIA, but Russia. And so we recognized their fingerprints on it. And a few days later, we went live on December 13th of 2020 with there's rogue code or an implant in SolarWinds. And the White House said it was Russian spy agency SVR. But what's interesting about this is over 300,000 customers, of those 18,000 downloaded the software that had the implant. And I think we all download Microsoft updates, or we download Adobe updates. And in my case, we downloaded the SolarWinds update. You trust the updates you download, but this one had a beacon in it that went outbound after approximately 11 days. So not 14, not 12, but 11. Kind of interesting. And the reason that beacon went out 11 days later is to separate the concept of, hey, we downloaded an update and then a beacon went out right away. It separated and made it harder for us to figure out what was going on. The implant also shut down your endpoint safeguards. So a lot of folks would be like, oh, we make endpoint technology that would detect that implant doing something malicious. Well, SolarWinds, the part of the platform where the implant ran as administrator. And because of that, that means the implant ran with privileges, and it had the privileges to shut off any of 50-something different security products. So it did that and did it successfully. So this thing, there is no magic wand to detect implants, period. In fact, most likely if you get hit with one, you won't notice it right away. So anyway, here's kind of the funnel. 300,000 potential customers, 18,000 what I call stage 1 downloads. And really, I would say there was only 50 or so companies that were stage 2 victims, where the threat actors behind this had a human on a keyboard, exfiltrating and stealing data. And that included folks like the Department of Justice, Department of Treasury, and us. So kind of hard to detect, very frustrating. What we learned about that, and when I come to the lessons learned on implants and lessons learned on other things like 0 days, I kind of limited it to 4. So many of you out there be like, Mandia, why are you only sharing 4? It's 4 fits on a slide nicely. So what did I learn from the SolarWinds implant, besides the personal lessons learned being a victim of it? On the personal side, I learned when you're a victim and you know it, it's a pretty lonely planet. You go forward, you tell the world about it, you take a 20% shareholder price hit, your customers get irate, very few people care about who hacked you and why, and nobody reads beyond the headline, FireEye compromised. It's very frustrating, and for all of you that have been through breaches before, you understand that. But we also learned it's fair game for espionage. This is not going to be the last implant, and in fact, we did respond to one in software used by a lot of retailers earlier in the spring of 2021. We learned supply chain matters. And for many organizations, you have to figure out who are your suppliers that matter, what is their risk profile, and what is their cyber program? Like, do they safeguard their software appropriately? And I can tell you, my company as a vendor, there's a time maybe 15 years ago where if we were doing business with a bank, they just send us a 1-page questionnaire. Hey, do you have a cybersecurity program? Yes. Hey, do you do penetration tests? Yes. Good to go. Now it's like a 10-page document. And before COVID, we had some banks that would send personnel on site to interview our people and actually inspect our software development practices. So supply chain security, especially inside the defense industrial base, is absolutely critical. For those of you who have to figure out who is your supply chain and what should we do to make sure the risk profile is appropriate for us, my recommendation is just walk down to the hall to the CFO's office and ask, who do we pay? Look at the list of all the people you pay or vendors you pay. Have your business line owners prioritize the top 10 And then over time, negotiate different contractual relationships with those 10 providers, or just get to know them, understand their risk profiles and how they do cybersecurity. Obviously, with an implant, since there is no magic, hey, I found it, you're going to want to know when somebody else finds one. And I'll share a little anecdote as to how my company found the implant. We didn't find it because we wanted to reverse the SolarWinds platform. When you reverse code, you have to take it from compiled code. Basically, we decompiled it into machine language, and we had to go through millions of lines to find a 4,000 line implant. You don't want to do that. And the only reason we even spent the time doing it is we exhausted every other investigative lead. We did forensics on every host we had, and we decided the earliest evidence compromises our SolarWinds machine logging into another system with a valid credential. We had to reverse the platform simply because it was the last investigative step left to make to understand the totality of our breach. So we did that. And to be clear, we asked our reverse malware engineers to look at the platform on the Monday, and they didn't really start reversing it till Wednesday because they really just didn't want to. Bottom line, we reversed it, found it, and it'll be a while till we find the next implant. And that's why you want to get adaptive network and endpoint controls as well. So when you're thinking about how to address an implant as a threat, really this applies to you if you're in government, defense industrial base, probably more than anywhere else. You need to have software that defends your networks, that can think and learn. They use machine learning models, and they can instantiate normal and instantiate abnormal. So it kind of showed you exactly what happened there. Now I want to talk about 0 days. And on 0 days, a 0-day attack is essentially an attack where there's no patch. And in 2019, we saw more 0 days than any year since we kind of tracked them. And that was 32. In 2020, we saw 30 0 days. Year to date in 2021, we're up to 64. Now it's a good news, bad news story. Good news first. The good news is our defenses are getting good enough that people have to spoil a 0 day to break into networks, meaning spear phishing is not working as well. 1 days aren't working as well. The bad news, probably a couple things on the bad news. First and foremost, the bad news is that criminal elements are getting to 0 days almost as much as nation states are. There's a time in my career where if we found a 0 day, I'd say 90% chance is being used by a government. Right now, it's about a 60% chance it's government, 40% chance it's criminal. And for the 64 0 days that we have found this year, that means we found them because a bad actor used them. So those are 64 0 days in use. Software is vulnerable and there is no patch. And almost all of our security programs are built to prevent the intrusion. But once somebody breaks in, we don't detect the second inning, the third inning, or in the MITRE kill chain, the latter stages, such as lateral movement, data exfiltration. So we have to have programs that can detect the second and third innings of these breaches. We have to have software or people and process that can do that, and the data that enables that detection. So with 0 days, the bottom line is they're going to work against you if you have that vulnerable software, and it'll be a compensating control that helps you detect the second and third innings of the breach. So what we're learning with 0 days is pretty simple. If you want to stop them from being as efficient or effective against you, first and foremost, you have to know your network. Attack surface management is what we call this today. It used to be called asset management. You just need to know what's on the internet, what version of the services you're running, and then have a great patch management program behind that, just to ensure you have a reduced window of exposure to 0 days. You want to have great intel sharing. You want to have friends in the business so that if a 0 day is found, you're finding out about it as fast as possible. And if patches are available, of course, you're going to put those patches into effect. And then you, again, similar to implants, if you have endpoint software or network security monitoring that is adaptive, can learn, and can think, you may detect this. And the reason I put that into play is with the hundreds of red teams we do every year, where people ask us to break into networks, we get in over 90% of the time. And we have kill shots for all the network and endpoint tech. But what stops our red teams from being successful as to stealing a CEO's email or getting to an industrial control system is the technology that we can't predict. That's not signature based, and it doesn't detect us on Monday, but does detect us on Wednesday. So be advised when you're buying security software, look at its learning system. How fast does it update? How does the software learn? And as an example of bad learning, really the legacy antivirus companies, where like Symantec or McAfee, they had signatures, and the way that antivirus got better is antivirus would miss something, and the victims themselves would find something, say, hey, that's malware, antivirus missed it, let's submit it to our AV vendor so they can stop it next time. And maybe the AV vendor would create a signature, maybe they wouldn't. But that's a bad model, because most people, when they're compromised, never find the malware. So you want to have active searching for new malware, and folks that respond to incidents all the time, like us, have a tendency to have learning systems. So not much you can do about 0 days, and the frustration there is, and we went public on a couple groups, 0 days have been in use by the criminal element. And an example of that was Excellion. We use their file transfer software. They're a great company. There's a couple 0 days on SonicWall, a security company out of Austin. There was 4 0 days in a week for Microsoft's Exchange mail server back in February. And then there was Pulse Secure had a 0 day that emerged in January. So most of these 0 days targeted defense industrial base, but the one that was interesting to me was Excellion. That 0 day targeted companies that had the platform that was vulnerable, and it was their older platform, but they targeted companies that were publicly traded or law firms, because the threat actors wanted to extort the victims. So the attackers would break in, steal critical email and critical documents, and then the attackers would threaten to go public unless extortions of up to $50+ million were paid in Bitcoin. And these attackers knew exactly who the Western press was that would write articles on the leaked and stolen data. So they created incredible amounts of pain. So 0 days in the hands of the criminal element is really not good. But I think the hack du jour right now that everybody's heard of is ransomware. So I'll step through this a little bit. Why are we hearing so much about ransomware? Is really because you could always do anonymous attacks on the internet if you cared to do so and you knew what you were doing. It would be hard to pierce anonymity behind an attacker sitting in Moscow if they wanted to mask it and go through a couple anonymizers, maybe buy access temporarily to providers in the United States somewhere, and then launch their attacks. So you could be anonymous on the attacks, but it was harder to be anonymous if you wanted to hack for profit. And there was a whole era from really 1996 till recently where most attackers for profit would hack to steal credit card numbers, to fraudulently buy things, ATM numbers and codes, 4-digit PINs to fraudulently withdraw money, or hack applications to fraudulently buy things. All of these things are complicated. The evolution and acceptance of digital assets such as Bitcoin really became the enabler to accelerate ransomware, because now you have an anonymous currency and you can extort or encrypt drives to destroy them and encrypt the data and just get payment. So with the rise of digital assets or digital currencies or cryptocurrencies, whatever you want to refer to them as, and because there's a whole bunch of exchanges primarily in Eastern Europe that don't follow the anti-money laundering rules, we've enabled criminals to be exceptionally successful and profitable at ransomware. And so it rose. And ransomware, what's frustrating about it is there was a time where if you got hacked by a ransomware actor, the going train of thought was all criminals hack the lowest hanging fruit, and that's how they make their money. Why try to rob the secure bank if there's an insecure bank right next door? And on the internet, we're all neighbors. So the bottom line is that's just not true anymore. What we're seeing is ransomware actors with 0 day capabilities because they're making so much money, they can buy zero-day capabilities from third parties that find them. So we see one party's breaking in, there's another party that will buy the access that the party number one obtained, and with that access, they'll steal documents or steal critical data and then deploy ransomware that encrypts as many drives as they possibly can. And then they stole the data so they can extort you. Then there's actually a third party that wrote the ransomware software. And what's amazing about the ransomware software, like REvil or DarkSide, these are ransomware actors that if you are a victim, you can pay to decrypt all of your drives, or you can pay and get a key that decrypts a single system, or you can even pay to get a key that decrypts by file. So it's incredible how advanced these systems are. It's terrible to be a victim. It's hard to see this slide, but this is back in 2020. We started responding to an actor named Maze, M-A-Z-E. Maze isn't exactly a friendly guy. And whoever he is, every time he compromised the network, he did an extort. They're anywhere from $3 to $5 million, but they always threatened to post data if you didn't pay them. So it was just really frustrating. And by the way, they're not alone. Many actors do that. And then I think most of you are aware of the Colonial Pipeline breach that we had the privilege of responding to. And I have to be honest, when I got the phone call on a Saturday morning, hey, we're responding to the ransomware at Colonial Pipeline, I thought they made faucets or kitchen sinks. I had no idea that they were refined gas, and they supplied 38% of the gasoline to the Eastern Seaboard from Atlanta to New York City. But they had to come offline based on the safety impacts when you have a ransomware attack occur. And just so you know, when you're a victim of a ransomware attack, it is obvious, machines grind to a halt. You usually get a message on your screen, but a lot of times the threat actors also send threatening messages. So you wonder if there's a physical portion to the attack. And under that fear, uncertainty, and doubt, a lot of folks will take the most safe precautions at that time, just like the CEO of Colonial chose to do. So it just shows potentially the unintended consequences that threat actors have when they break in and run ransomware, because it's highly probable the attackers that hit Colonial didn't know what Colonial did. When they ran the ransomware, they had no idea how widespread it would be and what the ramifications of that execution would be. So ransomware is pretty darn annoying. So what did we learn doing all these? First and foremost, you don't want to be the lowest hanging fruit, so you bolster your hygiene. Still, the number one way ransomware actors break in is spear phishing, so you want better spear phishing. And then when we talk about the board's top questions, I'll get into those last two, reducing blast radius and testing resilience. So we'll get right into, so what is a boardroom thinking about right now when it comes to cybersecurity? First thing they're thinking is, hey, how good are we? How good's our security program? How good are our security folks? And I get this question all the time because I primarily meet boards after they have a security breach. Usually their security is pretty good. But here's two things that boards can do to try to figure out or benchmark how good their security is and how good their people are. One of them I think is better than the other. But let's start with the one that's not as useful, a security maturity assessment. The PwCs, the KPMGs, Accentures, most security consulting firms do security maturity assessments. And they'll come in and say, we do 600 assessments a year. We do 300 of them in your industry. We've interviewed your people. We've looked at your processes. We've reviewed your documentation. And you're in the top 25% of all the retailers we've reviewed. Or you're in the top 25% of all the utilities we've looked at. And the board goes, good. Whereas, we're better than 75% of the folks out there. I don't know how meaningful that is. It's good to have it. It does expose weaknesses that you may want to address, but ultimately it shouldn't give you confidence that you're not going to have a breach within the next 24 hours. The assessment that I like more is what I call the red team assessment or a purple team assessment. If you want to know how good your security is, shoot real bullets at it. Give a group of 3 folks 5 days to break into your network, but don't just break in. If you're a retailer, have them break in and get credit data or shut down your point of sales. If you're a utility, have them break in and see if they can get to your operational technology or industrial control systems. If you're anyone, see if they can break in and get to your general counsel's email. These are things that nobody wants to live through. They don't want it to happen. That's why you do cybersecurity, to prevent those things. When you do those red teams, you get unvarnished truth. Could the threat actors that we hired break in? Yes or no? And if they did break in, could they make the threat we're trying to prevent become a reality? If they could, just make the adjustments. If they couldn't, you should feel real good because it's binary. I do believe if you do a red team with a lot of different companies that do them and they can't break into your network for 5 days, you should feel real good about it. And you feel your program works, your people, your technology, whatever you have, it did a pretty good job. And then you can simulate successful attacks as well, just to see how well your process works. So for those taking notes, all 7 of you, think about doing a purple team where somebody does a red team, and that's just a military term. Red team's always aggressor, blue team's always defense. Purple team would be a mix. Have the red team attack, blue team's aware of it, and you just work together to make sure the security apparatus can defend against that attack. And that's what a purple team would do. So purple team will answer, how good are you? And train your people. Second question we're getting from boards right now is, how resilient are we? And not because of hurricanes, not because of the California earthquakes, but because of ransomware. And so every time we brief boards or we do ransomware preparedness assessments, we do like 100 of them a year, there's only 2 things you can do to be resilient against ransomware. The first one is reduce your blast radius. And there's only 2 things you can do that. Segment your network as much as possible and do great privileged account management, because the Achilles heel for how ransomware usually spreads is network domain admin accounts. The only other way it's going to spread is a local 0-day, which is kind of rare. Has happened with attacks like WannaCry or NotPetya, but that's rare. So anyway, that's all you can do in regards to reducing the blast radius. And how resilient you are, if you're a CEO or board member, you should ask, what are our key assets? And get an answer. Here's our top 10 key assets from management. And then you ask, do we have backups? Are those backups secure? How fast can we recover those backups? How fast can we get up and running should any of that be impaired? And normally when ransomware hits a company, it does kind of impact by geography or by segment. And it may be like, hey, our Miami office is offline. Right now, the stage of ransomware preparedness is that you may have backups. They may or may not be secure, but almost no company can answer the question, how fast are you back up and running with critical business processes? I think 3 years from now, the majority of 1A enterprises or the Global 1000 will be able to answer that question. That if our key assets are in fact destroyed, whether it's natural elements or ransomware, here's how fast we're up and running. But we have some ways to go. So the takeaway from how resilient are we, if I'm a board director, is ask the CIO or the CEO, if you lose your 5 critical systems, your assembly line, your healthcare records, if it depends on what industry you're in, your point of sales, how fast are you up and running? If you don't get an answer, there's work to be done. If you do get an answer, yes, did you dry run it? Did you really do it? And so that's important. Then the last thing, which is pretty complex, is boards are wondering, when should we be informed about an incident? What is the gating factor? And this is pretty darn complex. So I made a whole slide on this. Who do you tell? What do you tell them? When do you tell them? And it's very complex. I can tell you in the SolarWinds implant, on the Friday when I was first briefed by our Chief Information Security Officer that we might have a problem, put that in quotes, we called a board meeting because my hunch was best to tell the board when an incident's a 2 out of 10, we still have the fog of war, and tell them to brace for impact, then call them 4 days later with a 10 out of 10 incident. And it just went straight to 10 out of 10, meaning bad. So it's hard to answer this question directly, and I get it all the time from boards. When should we know? Ultimately, I believe the first gating factor is your chief information security officer or equivalent head of cyber should be aware of every incident. They should be the gating factor of what to tell the CEO and when. And usually fast is a good MO for now. Then the CEO makes the call, does it go to the board or not? Right now, depending on industry and risk profile, a lot of different things go to the board. I can tell you this, it's very complex to have a framework made ahead of time that you adhere to. Because it's hard to codify the first couple innings of a security incident because you'll know you have a breach, but sometimes it takes 5 days to understand the impact of that breach. And it is usually the severity of impact that makes you escalate. So a good first inning rule is if somebody broke in and you don't yet know impact, at least escalate to CISO. And the CISO needs to know the risk profile of the CEO and their ability to understand. The challenge with these and why there's no hard and fast rule is every major global company has incidents all the time, but they're incidents that involve one machine and no data loss, or two machines and no data that matters. It's not a reportable incident. It's hard to tell you what to escalate for each industry because any unauthorized access to a utility is a lot worse than unauthorized access to a retailer that sells baked goods in Georgetown. So bottom line, the best way to get an answer to this, if you work at a large organization and you're unsure of what to communicate and when, do a dry run. Almost every major company is doing a ransomware exercise. It takes about an hour, maybe two. Almost any security consulting firm can do these exercises with your teams, and you can do them yourself. You simulate a ransomware incident and figure out, based on the trickle of information, when you would escalate, what escalation expectations even exist. And the folks that professionally do these dry runs know how to tease the information out to get you to different thresholds and recognize your CEO does want to know early in the process, or until there's confirmed impact, your CEO is not that interested. But the bottom line, it's very complex, and for regulated industries, you're going to have your own rules to govern. Biggest bang for the buck to truly understand your communications channel are those dry runs, and you can do one annually every year. Include the board, make it a 1 hour exercise with management and the board, and it'll go a long way. And then the last thing I'll talk about, and I'm going to be done in about 7 minutes, and then we'll do questions, is the CISO and the role. In my opinion, 2020 really empowered the Chief Information Security Officer because overnight the pandemic hit and everybody had to work remotely. And the first thing everybody had to do as an organization is say, can we work remotely and still be productive? As soon as that was answered, usually by polling employees, hey, are you productive? The second thing was, are we secure? And with that, CISOs had to go from we're security nerds that can opine about security to we have to operationalize this and operationalize it now. And with the rise of ransomware and the millions of dollars of payment, right now, CrowdStrike went public with it. The average payment for ransomware is $6 million. Most companies can't afford that. And by the way, I have no idea how you account for that if KPMG is auditing you. So good luck. I guess it's a consulting fee. But you have to be operational. You had to transform to the remote workforce and have to be an executive now. You have to be able to talk to the board because the board is reading about these incidents and understanding now attacks in the cyber domain can shut down businesses. And that is a major issue. And for many businesses like utilities, like healthcare, like pharma, like Colonial Pipeline, the shutdown of your business is a national security issue. So ransomware has now been labeled an issue of national security in the United States. And then what are the CISO priorities? And I wrote 8. This was just, I picked the top 8 based on my experiences dealing with CISOs. What are they doing? First, they're running those dry run exercises with other managers to include general counsel, chief financial officer, CEO, and many times they include the board. So the board gets used to and educated to cyber incidents and how management's going to handle them. Everybody's changing how they do identity. That's a 1-hour presentation in and of itself. But if you're running old on-prem identity, a lot of times attackers, I can tell you this, in 99% of the breaches we respond to, the attackers are hacking the identity infrastructure successfully. So we got to get to new ways to have identity in a faceless environment like the internet. CISOs are worried about supporting digital transformation at the speed businesses want to do it. Specifically, every business is going to cloud even faster than ever. First, all new companies are only cloud, and all old companies are going to cloud really fast, and COVID accelerated that. So now you have no borders. You're not safeguarding the 4 walls of your building anymore with your firewalls. You're basically having software-defined networking, and that's a big deal for CISOs. Big buzz phrase is zero trust. That's just a new term for old business practices in security of operating at least privilege, securing the data you have to secure, making sure your apps only talk to the apps they need to talk to, making sure finance can access finance, but not HR documents. HR can't access finance. And the long story with zero trust is essentially, instead of a moat around your whole network, you have a moat around every machine. And the best way to look at that is the old networks were kind of like, if you ever check into a hotel, it would be great to have the housekeeping key that opens up every door. That's old network security. The new network security is you have a different key for every door that you have to go into, and that would be zero trust. If you're cloud only, zero trust is easier. If you're a hybrid environment or on-prem environment, it's real hard to get to a zero trust network. And by the way, there's no magic wand that says, hey, we're zero trust now, good to go. It takes an assessment. Most security organizations are having a tough time hiring the people they need. There's a shortage of security experts. Everybody wants to output the next two together. Everybody wants to use software that thinks and learns to defend their networks. And I still think the best machine learning and data scientists go to the marketing companies, but security is getting their share now, and we'll solve that. And then last, the red teaming. Measure security effectiveness by just shooting real bullets and see what happens. It's the most binary, unvarnished truth you can get on how good your network is, your network security is. In the future, probably the ugliest slide I made because it's pretty boring. We're not going to solve cybersecurity issues with just technology, and we're not going to solve it with just technology and people. You actually have to have risks or repercussions to the nations that harbor the actors that launch attacks without any repercussions, period. There is no deterrent to ransomware right now. Doesn't exist. There are nations that support it, allow their citizens to run it, and we pay the price. So that's why you have to have public and private partnership to solve this. And a long story made short, it's going to take diplomacy, quite frankly, people and governments to hold other governments responsible for a lot of the things that we see on the internet. And with that, Jesse, I'd turn it over to you if you want to help me sift through any questions that are coming in.
Absolutely, Kevin. Thank you so much. I'm just going to start with the earliest questions we got here. So we got a question from Mark Lowe asking, when you say physical attack, what is it that you mean?
Oh, in regards
that was earlier in the presentation.
Yeah, I've responded to breaches where ransomware is used, drives are encrypted, or in one case, the drives are just destroyed, like people deleted everything on it. But accompanying that deletion were threats to the leaders. If you do this, we're going to do that. And it's just an actor's way of instilling as much fear and uncertainty and doubt to get you to pay or to get you to not do certain things. Probably the most common, the most well-known example is Sony Pictures, when they were compromised in 2014 by North Korea, and their systems were really deleted over the movie called The Interview. And it wasn't just a cyber attack. There was a bunch of communications really to just scare people. And that's what happens. It's happened in other places as well. So these are bad actors. and they do threaten things. And, you know, from my perspective, having responded to thousands of attacks, I recognize those threats for what they are. Highly improbable that there's any physical component to this computer intrusion. So I didn't mean there's an actual physical component, but imagine if you were the CEO of Colonial Pipeline and you're seeing a cyber attack and you run 5,000 miles of pipeline. You might think safety first, I got to come down. And you're also thinking, if I'm getting a cyber attack, is there a physical component to this as well? Why is my company being targeted? I mean, I live in this world every day. I recognize they may not have been targeted, but to be a victim of this, and you don't live it every day, you are worried about other things besides just the cyber component. And the actors know that. So Jesse, that's what I meant. I have not seen yet, although Colonial Pipeline, I would argue, did have a physical ramification. We responded to a breach in the Middle East where somebody ran malicious code and the refinery shut down. It triggered the safety aspects of the refinery and it shut down. But I'm not aware of direct loss of life to an intrusion. But I also know there was an attack in 2008 called Stuxnet, where it was malware that shut down Iranian nuclear plants from making enriched uranium or enriched plutonium. So bottom line, there has been destructive malware attacks, but they're rare.
Thank you. So our next question is from Gary Van Horn. He indicates that a miss that he's seen for companies that are doing other things right is they're getting back up and running, but for not first determining the vector and plugging the hole. And he's curious about your perspective on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's hard to do both in parallel, but that's what you try to do. We respond to well over 100 ransomware attacks every year. And no CEO says, hey, let's pay the ransom, by the way. That is not the default. It's actually the exact opposite. We're not paying, we're getting up and running. They're doing both. They're trying to figure out systemic calls. How did somebody break in and how do we get up and running? It's hard to tell which one will happen first. And normally, I mean, quite frankly, it's a good thing if you can get up and running first, that's what happens. But I can tell you both work streams are as fast as possible. They are working to figure out, or at least at our customers, what happened and what to do about it from a cyber defense perspective. And how do we get up and running and operational? It does just happen to be that getting operational happens faster. That's all. So the perception would be that that was a higher priority. I'm not always convinced it is. It's a tie. They want to do both. And it depends on industry too. Healthcare, it's about getting up and running faster, period, because you're putting lives at risk if you have a whole bunch of machines at a hospital getting shut down. So anyway, I'll leave the answer at that, Jesse. But for the most part, it's parallel efforts with the same priority, high priority.
Thank you. In your experience from Francisco Gray, how secure are cloud platforms themselves? In other words, how sure can one be that the underlying service is secure against most types of attacks? Their experience has been the vast majority of those compromises were due to user error.
Yeah, you know, I can tell you this. When you think about the big three, it's Amazon, Google, and Azure at Microsoft. It is my belief that their infrastructure, the platform that they provide, they have a bet the platform problem if that underlying fabric's compromised. So they're going to spend a lot more money to secure that than any of us are going to spend securing our organizations. But what goes on that fabric? What goes on that infrastructure, Jesse? The security, that's on you, the consumer. So I think the fabric and the platform is secure. There's some challenges, like every once in a while, you can't get the audit trail you want, and it's frustrating. But a lot of times in our remediation plans, and we write 1,000 of these every year, part of our remediation is, hey, it's time to take your on-prem stuff, let's go to the cloud, because you get quicker backups, it's cheaper, recovery's faster, and you don't have to worry about the underlying OSs and all the security there. For the most part, it's just it's easier to do. So I'm confident that the cloud providers are doing everything they can to prevent their infrastructure from being compromised. And, but someday that may happen. And the challenge will be when that does happen, do we know about it? And it'll be frustrating for all of us the day that does happen.
Thank you. So Leland Van Brunt asks, do you have any advice for, my chat just moved here for you. Do you have any other career advice for how a college or high school student can get started in a cybersecurity career? Anything they should focus studies on, or in particular skills they should focus on?
Yeah. So in general, I have found it easier to take a technical person and make them great at security than non-technical and make them great at cybersecurity. But you look at the tasks you do in security, from sitting in the ops center looking at alerts, which is what I did when I was in the Air Force for the first year and a half, all the way to malware analysis. And we teach courses and all this stuff. And we've trained a lot of FBI agents, a lot of other government agencies. And what I've learned is a computer science background and a programming background, backtailing into cybersecurity. That works really well. Poli-sci major going into it, maybe a little bit longer road. However, threat intelligence has a lot of political science majors, history majors, and others, because all cyber attacks do reflect real geopolitical conditions. Even ransomware does. All ransomware is coming out of Eastern Europe by Russian-speaking people, because last I checked, there's probably tensions between Russia and the United States. So because of that geopolitical condition, it is probable that the Russian government condones ransomware actions against the United States. I doubt the Russian ransomware actors are ransoming Russian companies. That's probably problematic for them. So you can study anything. If you're passionate about it and you really want to do it, it is pretty helpful to get a CS degree, computer science degree.
Thank you. Stuart Long asks,
and I'll leave you with this, Jesse. Really, oh, go ahead. You first.
Oh, no, I was going to pivot to another question.
Mm-hmm.
So from your perspective, what is the next up and coming threat that might be underrated and we should be spending more time watching or working to prevent?
Well, if you watched Independence Day, it's aliens that run the same operating systems we do. But no, the next threat, we have to, well, I can tell you the next thing we have to solve in cybersecurity. You cannot have, there's two ways to answer that question. You have to impose risk to the bad actors, or we're all going to have a breach over time. Right now, if you're sitting in Moscow, you can just, it's like unlimited shots on goal. Even if you're terrible at hockey, if you get 1,000 shots, you're going to put the puck in the net somewhere. And that's what's happening right now. So the first thing we have to solve is international cooperation to impose risk and repercussions to nations that harbor cyber criminals. I don't think we'll ever have rules of engagement that agree on cyber espionage, because the asymmetry is what makes people do it. North Korea can't beat us with tanks and airplanes, so they're going to try to beat us in the cyber domain. And you'll never come up with rules to live by to govern that effort. But cyber crime, I think you're going to see rules that happen. I'll give you the three things I'm most worried about, because I've never seen them happen yet. Every modern nation is developing an offensive capability. I've never seen a modern nation, meaning China, US, Russia, Iran, they all have good offensive capabilities. In my experience with what I've seen in plain view, I've never seen a modern nation put malware that's industrial control system aware forward deployed. So that's important, because that would show escalation. I've never seen a modern nation change data, so you can't trust the data you're seeing. And I've never seen a modern nation destroy data, period. So that's kind of the rules of the playground right now. The problem is none of us really agreed to them. They're just happening. So the day, I thought it was a big deal in 2015, in August of 2015, when I saw a Russian Foreign Intelligence Service hacking a US government agency, and they were letting us observe them, because I had responded to that same agency for 15 years and they never let us watch what they did. They knew we were responding, but kept attacking anyway. They knew we were monitoring, and they let us see their tools, tactics, and procedures. To me, that's a huge deal, because that means escalation. So that's why I gave you those three rules, Jesse. No forward deployed malware that's industrial control system aware. Others have said they've seen it. I've responded to thousands of breaches. I've never seen it. I've never seen a government change data to lie to us. I've never seen a government actually delete data other than log files to cover their tracks, which is fair game. So that means no destructive attacks. That now all bets are off with Iran versus Israel. They're both hacking each other and destroying everything right now. North Korea versus South Korea, there might be destructive attacks. But the US and Russia and China aren't doing those things. The day we see one of those nations do one of those things, and I forgot a fourth, there's never been a good false flag op. Inside baseball, when the Russians hack, we know it's them. When China hacks, you know it's them. When the US hacks, we know it's them. Nobody's really hiding it. They'll hide it to the public and be ambiguous. But to folks that have been doing this, everybody, you know, Russia's still wearing their CCCP jerseys when they're hacking the United States. No one's faking out that there's somebody else. So those are the 4 rules that when somebody breaks that, we got a problem. That means an escalation.
Kevin, thank you so much for your thoughts. I would just ask if you have any parting thoughts for the group here and any thoughts for aspiring students as they're going forward and thinking about cybersecurity.
Yeah, I can tell you this. It's a great time to get into cyber. It's a great time to think about it. It's tied into everything. When you look at the traditions of conflict, there's air, land. Well, actually, it was just land, then land and sea, then land, sea, and then air. Now there's a cyber domain. And the United States does not have supremacy in the cyber domain, nor does anybody. But we now know that in conflict alone, how are you going to control air? With cyber. Cyber right now is what controls the drones. It's cyber that's controlling autonomous vehicles and other things. So the security in the cyber domain will get more and more important as we all have wearable devices that we want to trust. We have cars that are self-driving, we want to trust. And we're going to have apps that control more and more of our daily activities that we need to trust. So there's a need for all of us to get into this and push not just for technical solutions, but to push nations to hold other nations accountable. So thank you very much, Jesse, for this opportunity. Thank you to the University of Oregon.
At this point, we are at the end. That was our last session. But I just want to spend a couple of minutes to thank everybody for not just coming to this event, but for sticking around. Almost everybody who started this morning stayed around with us. We had some fascinating new things this year, like the Oregon Cyber Cup. And I think we had some really good speakers this time around. So thanks everybody for coming to the Oregon Cyber Resilience Summit 2021. We hope to see all of you next year, hopefully in person, for Oregon Cyber Resilience Summit 2022. And please bring a friend with you when you come to the next one. So other than that, I think we're good to go. Big thanks again to all our sponsors. You made it happen. All the speakers, presenters, volunteers, everybody that's working in the back end even right now. Big thanks to everybody for jumping in and supporting and being a part of the conference this year. Other than that, we'll sign off until next year. Thanks, everybody.